Hey, everybody, welcome to Becoming More Me. Today's episode centers around transitioning out of relationships, especially when that transition involves divorce. My guest today is Karen Covy. She's a divorce coach, lawyer, mediator, arbitrator, speaker, and author. She coaches busy professionals and business owners who want to make clear, confident, informed decisions during highly charged emotional situations. She also helps her clients become the CEOs of their own divorce so they can navigate through it with less conflict, less expense, and less damage to themselves and their loved ones. Karen's the author of When Happily Ever After Ends, How to Survive Your Divorce Emotionally, Financially, and Legally. She's also the creator of the online divorce program, The Divorce Roadmap 2.0, and she's the host of the podcast Off the Fence. Her sweet spot is helping people make better, more well-reasoned decisions in high emotional situations, especially when the stakes are high and the outcome is uncertain. Hey, Karen, thanks so much for joining me today.
It is my pleasure to be here.
Oh, absolutely. I'm so thrilled. And I would love to start by just kind of getting to know you, who you are when you're not doing this amazing work that you do, helping people navigate divorce, who you enjoy spending your time with, where you live, maybe some hobbies. Can you fill us in on a little bit of that?
Okay, all the fun stuff, huh?
Yeah.
So I live and work outside of Chicago, Illinois. I live with my husband, and I like to say I am one of the most happily married divorce professionals I know. I adore my husband. He built me my office, so I'm so excited about that. And what do I do in my free time? Okay, deep dark secret, all right? I'm a closet Zumba instructor.
Ooh, that's
So I
so fun.
love, yeah, I have been a group fitness instructor almost as long as I have been a lawyer, which is, let's just say we measure in decades. And so when Zumba came along, I'm like, oh, that looks like fun. I want to do that. So I do that too.
That's so fun. I love that.
Yeah.
So I know you do a lot of amazing work helping people navigate divorce, and you describe your approach as heart-centered and happiness-centered. So can you elaborate a little bit on what that means and how that might differ from other traditional divorce processes?
Okay, well, the traditional divorce process is pretty ugly. It has very little to do with hearts except to break them.
Mm,
And while, yeah, I mean, look, the truth is there is no easy way to do a hard thing. And divorce is a hard thing. And it's never going to be easy. It's never going to be fun. I can promise pretty much anyone, and I don't make promises lightly, that your divorce will take longer and cost more than you think it is,
mhm.
than you think it will. But there are ways to do it that leave you that they can start you in your healing journey earlier and leave you at the end of it ready to start a new life instead of broken into so many pieces that it's going to take years to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. And so that's what I like to help people do is to get through it in that way, in integrity with who they are and what they want their life big picture to look like, rather than falling down to the lowest, meanest, uh, common denominator and just being, angry and money grubbing and all the things that they're really not, but divorce tends to bring that out in people.
For sure. What originally led you to practice divorce law and then to transition into being a divorce, coach and consultant?
Well, when I started my practice of law as a trial lawyer. So I did jury trials for, pretty good sized Chicago law firm. And then I did that for a number of years. And then I went to the state's attorney's office and I was the head of their civil bureau. I was the bureau chief. So I supervised a bureau of about 100 lawyers doing all kinds of different, practicing in all kinds of different areas of law. And after about 3 years of doing that, I decided, look, you're either career government or you're not, and I am not. So I said, okay, I'm going to hang out my proverbial shingle. I'm going to do what lawyers were supposed to do back in the day, right? So I went out, I got an office. And I told everybody I know, I will take any kind of case there is except divorce. And you know what they say, when
And
you
the
make
universe
millions,
said,
the universe said, I don't think so, sweetheart. And client after client kept coming and knocking on my door and saying, Hey, Karen, can you help me with my divorce? Hey, Karen, I've got this divorce. And literally, I was in my office and I was like, I threw up my hands and I said, Okay, I'll do divorce. But because I had a decade of experience going into divorce, the first time I walked into divorce court, it made zero sense to me. I mean, I am a lawyer, and what I saw was like, this is the dumbest thing on the planet. I mean, it's one thing to really be ripping someone's face off in cross-examination when you've got like the head of a major corporation that manufactured drugs that killed babies or something, right? I mean, they did something terribly bad. But when that person that you're ripping their face off, or your lawyer is ripping their face off in cross-examination, when that's your spouse and you have to sit next to them at your kid's soccer game that night, like there's no universe where that makes sense. Like none, zero. And so I kept looking for the better way. I'm like, okay, if I'm going to do this, I want to do it in a healthier way. And back at that time, mediation was barely even a thing. Like I was one of the first mediators in the Chicagoland area. Nobody was doing it. And that was better, but it still wasn't perfect and it's not right for everyone. So I said, okay, I became an arbitrator. I started doing collaborative divorce. I did all the things.
Hmm.
And finally, I was in my office, had my own shingle. I never wanted to be a big firm. It was me and my secretary. That's what the way I liked it. It was a hot day. I had a client in my office and I was, we were going through an initial interview. Client leaves. Secretary had heard it all, walks out. Now, she had worked for all the big guns in Chicago. She worked for all the major law firms, right? So client leaves and she looks at me and she said, no one else does that, right? And I was like, does what? I mean, I had a conversation and she said, you sat there for an hour and a half with this person. You told them what their options were, how everything worked, what the next step in the process was, what they could expect, blah, 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 blah. And I said, well, if other lawyers don't do that, what do they do? And she said, they give them a contract and say, sign here, we'll file tomorrow. And I said, well, that didn't seem right to me because I know there are different ways to do this and it's not my life. I don't get to make your choices for you. My job, as I saw it, was to tell you what those choices were so that you could make better ones. And so, I that got me sort of interested in the education, which led me into coaching. And ultimately, I tried to do it all, but I couldn't. And so I had to make choices. And I said, okay, I'm going to go with coaching because I can reach the most people and have the biggest impact if I do that, rather than taking cases one-on-one as a lawyer.
Hmm. I wish I knew you when I went through my divorce. Because
I
it's
wish I knew you then too.
it's true. As in, people don't get the compassion or even the understanding of what their options are that they're looking for in this. And it's just it makes something that already feels so cold and dark and desolate just feel even more separating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I'm
what people don't realize is when they walk into, I mean, they're just doing what they know. So they're like, get a divorce, need a lawyer. So they go to the lawyer's office. And what they don't understand is that the lawyer is saying to them and explaining to them not what they need, what kind of process they need or would work best for them. The lawyer's explaining what the lawyer does, right? So if it's like the old saying that when the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Well, if you go to the trial lawyer's office, they're going to say, I will fight for your rights. I will protect you. Just, we've got to go to court. You go to the mediator's office and they're going to say, we can work this out. You go to the collaborative divorce lawyer's office and they're going to, try to, sell you on collaborative divorce. And it's because these are all processes. And I'm not saying the lawyers are malicious, but that's what the lawyer is comfortable doing. It's not necessarily what's right for you. And you can't know what's right for you unless you understand what your options are and then make a choice.
yeah. It seems like it's awfully hard to find a heart-centered lawyer.
There are some out there. I will tell you, there really and truly are. There are
I
some
believe it.
fabulous divorce lawyers in the country. There's some that are perhaps not so fabulous, but but here's the thing. It's hard to find them. And you as just a person, where are you supposed to look? On the internet? Oh, that's a great idea. You get review like people lawyers are horrible at getting reviews, especially ironically, the best lawyers suck at all the marketing stuff and getting reviews and because they're lawyering, right?
Yeah, it's no different for, I mean, coaches like us in this world. It's like everybody wants us to be, is it not enough that we're coaching or we're therapists or we're all these other things, and then we also have to market well and advertise well and do all these other things, be good copywriters and all this
Yeah.
other stuff. And it just doesn't, the shoe doesn't fit in all those departments.
I know. And so I used to say back in the day when there was more just straight up advertising, like print ads and radio
Sure.
ads and those kinds of things, that the quality of the lawyer was inversely proportional to the amount of their advertising budget. In other words, the more they spent on advertising, the less you wanted to choose that lawyer.
Yeah. Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. That's for sure. So, you wrote an awesome book called When Happily Ever After Ends: How to Survive Your Divorce Emotionally, Financially, and Legally. What inspired you to write this book, and what are some of the key lessons or advice that you're hoping readers take away from reading it?
So when I wrote the first edition of the book, we're in the second edition now, but when I wrote the first edition of the book, I was just thinking of like, I haven't been divorced, but my approach to solving any problem, like something comes, I'm going to go get a book on it. Now, this was the original book came out in, I think it was 2006. So it was like the internet wasn't in the same place that it is today, right?
Sure.
So you couldn't just go research on Google. So I would go to the library or go to a bookstore and look for books, right? And so I said to myself, okay, you're trying to help people through divorce. Go see what's out there. And I went to the bookstore, and literally your choices at that time were Divorce for Dummies, which was the best book that was out there. Then
Yeah.
there were the books
This is
about,
also, ironically, the exact time that I was going through my divorce. So it's just kind of funny to hear this parallel. Continue.
yeah, I mean, it was the wild, wild west back then, right? Or the other kind of book you got was the shark tricks and tips and tactics to really take your spouse to the cleaners. Or you got the autobiography of the poor woman, or usually it was the woman whose divorce sucked and it ruined their life. Like none of these were helpful for somebody who wanted to go through divorce. And so I said, okay, let me take a stab at this. And so I got a publisher and I wrote the book because it was traditionally published, the first version, the first edition of it. And the message for people was that, like, there's a lot of stuff in the book and there's a lot about processes and, tips, tricks, tactics, all those things. But fundamentally, what I came up with and realized was that divorce follows the laws of the universe. And there are three laws of the universe that you have to keep in mind. People get so caught up in the nitty gritty of what's going on in front of them that they forget the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is those three laws are control, karma, and responsibility. And responsibility is the first one of those. You are responsible for your own life, your own experience, your own divorce. Now, when people hear me say that, they go crazy and they go, "You're saying this is my fault?" I'm not talking about fault. I'm talking about responsibility. Takes two people to tango. And you had some responsibility in getting married and getting your relationship to where it was when the divorce is happening. Even if the only bad thing you did was make a poor choice of who you married, that you
Sure.
weren't compatible, right? So until you take responsibility, you have no power. You can't change because you're giving your power to somebody else and saying, poor me, I'm a victim.
Sure. It's
And
interesting how
so
responsibility always gets confused with fault, isn't it? It's like it's
that's
such an easy word to deconstruct and to realize that it is literally your ability to respond.
fun. Exactly. That is exactly what it is. And but it's not about people, what they hear is blame.
Right.
It's your fault. You did this bad thing. And that's not what I was saying at all. I mean, so rule number
Like, what are
one
you going to do
was,
next?
yeah. responsibility.
what are you gonna make of this situation?
Yeah, like you're in it, and you can either let everyone else, the lawyers, the judges, your spouse, let everyone else, take the reins, or you can actually start doing something to move yourself forward. So that was the first law. The second law is control. Everybody going through a divorce wants their spouse to change. If he would only blah, 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 if she would just stop blah, blah, blah. And the problem is you can't control them.
Mm-mm.
The only person you can control is yourself. So if you can turn the focus inwards instead of outwards, you have the ability to actually make a difference and make your experience better. But that's not most people's first reaction, right? And the last thing is karma. Everybody wants to have their day in court so they can tell the judge, he did all these bad things, she did all these bad things. Look at me, I'm the good person. And it doesn't matter.
Who are we proving it to?
Yeah. And most of the time, you're never ever going to get that chance because that's not the way courts work, right? And so at some point, you've got to just say, what goes around comes around. If my spouse is screwing me in some aspect of the divorce, you know what? It's not worth the rest of my life being bitter and angry. It's on them. It's their karma. And you just let karma take control, and you let it go, because otherwise it will eat you alive for the rest of your life. And that's not the place that anybody really wants to be in, but you've got to be willing to let go of the anger and the hate to
Yeah.
get there.
Yeah, and forgiveness is at the heart of that, which is always more about your own happiness than it is about letting anybody off the hook.
100%.
Yeah, but a lot of times our anger and our bitterness and our resentments kind of keep us in that stuck place, which is stuff that I love to geek out on. But
Yeah. Well,
it is the
well,
heart of
look,
divorce for so
you're
many.
gonna feel those things, and you've got to let yourself feel it, but it's not getting stuck there. It's feel it, deal with it, move through it and past it, not stay there for the next 25 years.
Ugh, I can only imagine. And I don't want to.
Some
So,
people do.
oh my goodness. So, how do you work with people? What is your process of working with people? Are they already getting divorced? Are they thinking about divorce? I know you do a lot with helping people make decisions. So, tell me more
Yeah,
about
I'm going to answer you like a lawyer. It depends. So here's the thing. I take some people, what I found, like I thought that I would work with people going through the process, help them make better decisions, because one of the things I truly believe to the bottom of my soul is in the concept of informed consent, right? You can do whatever you want, but you should know what you're doing before you decide to do that, right? So I would help educate people, guide them through the process, help them make a strategy, because everybody thinks their lawyer's going to make the strategy for them. And yeah, the lawyer will make the legal strategy, but that's about 10% of your divorce. Everything else, you got to figure that stuff out too, right? So I thought that's where I would work with people most of the time, and I do a lot of that. But what I found as I started to get into the work more was that the biggest place where people get stuck is, do I stay or do I go? Because notwithstanding the politicians who rail against divorce and say, oh, people take this too lightly, I don't know anyone who takes their divorce lightly or
that.
takes their marriage lightly. It is a huge decision, especially when you have kids, to say, am I going to end this relationship and move on? What does that do to my family? What does it do to my kids? What does it do to my lifestyle? What does it do to me as a human being and what my concept of myself is? What does it do to my dreams? It's all those things, and people get stuck. And so they stay in that on the fence position for years, sometimes for decades. And again, like, I just don't think that's any way to live a life on the fence.
So then what are some tools or strategies for making those informed consent sort of decisions?
In that, when you're talking about the stay or go decision, you've got to understand, what if you choose the path of divorce, what is that going to look like? Because people have all kinds of ideas about what they think divorce is going to be. And then they get into it and they're like, oh, I had, it's this. I had no idea, right? It's not the way many people think. So you've got to understand what that's likely to look like. You have to understand what your options are with your marriage. Staying married in the circumstances that you are currently in is not your only option. There are ways to work on the marriage, there are ways to make it better. And sometimes you've got to try that before you realize, yeah, that ain't going to work. But at least you tried. And then if you do decide to go, you can go with a clear conscience. And there are also all kinds of alternatives. We live in a world that isn't as black and white as it used to be. A lot of people will try a trial separation, or they will live separated but still married. Okay, that's great. What does that look like? What is that relationship going to be? What if you had the power and the ability to create the rules of your own relationship?
So this starts to sound a little bit like the more spiritual and manifesting kind of stuff that I geek out on. And I'm just wondering, are you as a divorce lawyer, divorce coach, do you bring some of that into what you're doing? Because for me, I'm over here thinking, okay, thoughts become things. If I was going through this again, I would be like putting myself into the feeling of it being already accomplished in the way that I want it to turn out, and spending time in that vibration, working. I mean, I'd be working on all these things from a point of a manifester.
If my clients are like you, then we can absolutely go down that path. And I personally, I'm on 100% the same page as you. Like I geek out on all this stuff too. So
There's
if
more
people are,
universal laws.
yeah, exactly. And if people are open to that, great, yay. But if they're not, then I am perfectly capable of doing the more traditional, conservative, this is how you do it, strategic thinking as well. But fundamentally, when it comes to decision making, which is where I geek out with people, your head can know anything you want to tell your head. But ultimately, when you get your head, your heart, and your gut all aligned, you get this sense of just knowing that this is the right thing for you to do, even if it looks insane, even if other people don't understand it, and you don't know how it's all going to turn out, but you just know that's the step you have to take. That knowing brings you a sense of peace that you can only get when you're all aligned.
Yeah.
But
That alignment is also your empowerment. It's like your whole empowerment channel,
yeah,
everything being lined up for you to actually receive what you want.
exactly, but people get all caught up in their head because they're scared. The divorce threatens your survival, as like even if you're the primary breadwinner, then you're worried about, oh my, what am I going to have to do if I have to pay for the kids and pay for the spouse and give this money and blah blah blah. So you're worried about survival. And if you're the spouse who was a stay-at-home parent, you're really worried about survival because you're saying, how am I going to live? Who's going to pay the bills? What's going to happen? Like it triggers all of our primal instincts,
Yeah.
right? And it makes sense, but so first, you got to deal with all that stuff. Then you got to put your head in the game and be smart about it. And then you start to line up the head, the heart, and the gut and say, what do I know in my soul to be the right thing for me? Because you can't say what's right for the next person. You don't know. At least I think you don't know. I don't know. But if I can help you know for you, that's the goal.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, I know at least for me, that time of divorce was a very like disembodied time. Like I did not feel like all of those parts were connecting and aligning in the way that I can now get them aligned very easily, but I also had no understanding of my nervous system or so many other things then either. But like it was just a very uh heady kind of time. And
People call it a fog, like that you feel like you're in a fog.
yeah, probably kind of accurate. But yeah, so I think, I mean, having somebody like you to help guide people and keep them grounded is probably really valuable.
Yeah, because look, when you're in that state, and because it's a shock to your system, it's you're grieving, you're going through a grieving process. I don't care if you were the person who wanted the divorce or the one who didn't, you are still going to have to deal with your emotions and deal with your grief at the loss of the life you thought you were going to have, the loss of the spouse, the loss of the marriage. It's all the things, right? And so for a while, you do get this disembodied sense. But just think about it. If your spouse had died, heaven forbid, but when spouse dies, people tell the widow or widower, don't make any big decisions for a year, right? When somebody files for a divorce, they're like, okay, what do you want to do with your life? How are you going to divide your assets? And you're just like, it people come to my office and they sit across and they look like deer in headlights.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it's about giving you slowing the process down, giving you the time and the space to deal with your emotions and get your head back in the game. It takes time.
Yeah, for sure. So if somebody is having a difficult time in their relationship and they are, as your podcast title is called, on the fence and yours is off the fence, if they're in that place of not knowing whether they're on or off the fence, what's the best place to start?
The best place to start is deciding what you want. And that's also the hardest place to start because most people have no idea what they want. They know what they don't want, which is better than nothing, but it's still there's a chasm between knowing what you don't want and knowing what you do want. So that's how I work with people is I start to pull out from them, through questions, through exercises, through, different things that we talk about. What do you want? What do you want your life to look like? What do you want your marriage to look like? Can this marriage that you're in ever be that? Can it be close enough that you're satisfied? Is that the kind of life you want? Do you want a good enough life? And some people say yes, look, I don't want to blow up my family. If I could just get to this level, we're good, great. Then we can work on that. But other people say, no, I want more. I really want the deep, loving, committed relationship that I thought I was going to get in this marriage and did not. And so that step one is identifying what you want, and that in and of itself is a process,
Sure.
right? And for some people, it's easy. They just know. But for most people, it's not easy at all.
No, because it typically involves you becoming a totally new person,
Hmm. Yeah.
new standards, new, values, new priorities, all sorts of things, every new part of our journey requires that though, but it is
Yeah.
definitely like a chrysalis to butterfly sort of a thing going on there.
Oh, yeah. You have to be reduced to a glob of goo. And who wants that? I mean, really. And the other thing that makes it even harder is that even if you are willing to be the glob of goo, you don't want that to happen to your kids. So that you add that into the mix and it makes things even trickier, right?
Sure.
So, but until you get clear on what you want, you can't create it.
Yeah, it's so true, man. So if people are going through this, do they typically, and this might be another it depends answer, would people typically start working with somebody like you as a coach before they hire a lawyer, or after they hire a lawyer, or simultaneously?
In a perfect world, they hire me before the lawyer. Because part of the value I bring to them is figuring out how do you find a lawyer and which kind of lawyer do you want? Remember the hammer and the nail. You want to first, most people go to the lawyer first and then they end up using the divorce process that lawyer is good at, right? You want to do it the opposite way. You want to figure out what process do you prefer to use or do you want to try to use, and then find a lawyer who does that,
Yeah.
right? Because then you'll get what you need. So it's about understanding you've got to have a level of knowledge about process before you choose a lawyer. And so it's helpful then if people are working with a coach before that so that I can help guide them through, and I can help say to them, okay, if you want this kind of lawyer, these are the kind of places you're going to find that lawyer. This is how to tell if somebody is really walking the talk, so to speak. And then they can go from there.
Does your program have a specific time frame, or is there a normal amount of time that it normally takes to go through these processes with you?
That is an it depends answer, because it depends on what condition someone is when they come to me. I
Mhm.
get people who are like completely, they're in that fog, or they're in more than fog, it's angst. It's the dark night of the soul. Like, I don't know what to do. If I take this path, it's gonna suck, and I'm gonna spend a lot of money, and my kids are gonna be a mess, and nothing's gonna be the same. But if I take this path and I stay married, I am dying a little more every single day. I don't know which one to go, and blah, 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 blah. So for them, they've got to get through all of that before we even get to, okay, now let's start getting into the divorce itself, right? But other people will come to me when they're in the divorce themselves, either because their spouse made the decision for them and now they've got to deal with it. Those are the people who are really in a fog, because if they didn't see it coming, they're in shock,
Sure.
right? So those people they don't have to deal with the decision making of the divorce, but they have to deal with all the decisions that come after that, right? So they
Their
will
own
do shorter
acceptance of
work,
the decisions.
right? And some people come to me, and a service that I provide, but it's only for people in Illinois when they're stuck in the middle. And they say, usually in the middle, a client will come to me and say, you know, I don't think my lawyer has my back. And because in the middle, everything slows down. You're just sort of in no man's land. And you're like, is this thing ever gonna end? And sometimes, like as an Illinois lawyer, I can do a consultation for them and say, show me what you got. Let me see the paperwork. Let me see, who your lawyer is, what they've done. And most of the time, what I see is a massive lack of communication between the lawyer and the client, right? And sometimes I look at them like, your lawyer is worth their weight in gold. They're doing a fabulous job. They're just not telling you or explaining to you what they're doing. And so, yeah, but this is awesome. And sometimes it's like, yeah, no, let me give you names, right?
Yeah.
And because people in that middle, like, you get to this point, so many people get to this point, you just feel like you're stalled out. You
Yeah.
want to move it forward and you don't know how.
Yeah. And usually there's some kind of a lack of communication or miscommunication that got you into the divorce situation to begin with. And then you find yourself in this situation with the people that you're trusting to help you, feeling like there's that thing being created there too with the lack of communication. And it just starts feeling like, like, what am I attracting to myself here?
Yeah, and you start wondering, like, is it me? Is there something wrong with me? Am I the bad communicator? And it's the way the system is and the way it works, right? And
Yeah.
so and sometimes it's about communicating with your lawyer that, look, I need to get this done. Like, we need to really light a fire here. And the problem is there's two sides, right? Even if your lawyer is doing everything they can, if your spouse is dragging their feet and the court system is backed up, which pretty much every court system is, you kind of just have to be patient.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad that you're out there giving people hope, giving people guidance, shining the light on all the things they need to look at so that they can feel really confident and good about these really big decisions that they're making. So, where can people find you? Where can they learn more about your programs and you and everything that you're up to?
Yeah, the best place is on my website. It's karencovy.com, KarenCovy.com. There is no E in my version of Covey. Otherwise, I would be related to someone famous, and that would be wonderful, but it's not true. So it's KarenCovy.com. You can find me on all the socials too. It's always Karen Covy.
Lovely. Well, thank you so much for being here and having this conversation with me today.
Thank you for having me. This has been really enjoyable. Thank you.
Yes, and to all of you who are listening, I know you have so many choices when it comes to what you listen to on podcasts. So thank you for choosing Becoming More Me. Thanks for spending some of your precious time with me today. If you loved this episode, please leave a review or simply share it with someone else who would get great benefit from it too. If you share on social media, please tag me so I can personally connect and thank you. Until next time, keep taking bold and brave steps towards becoming more of who you want to be in this world. You are capable, you are worthy, and you are enough. And if your inner critic is still trying to argue with those facts, hit me up. We've got work to do.